Amiga Bundle. Welcome back to the channel, everybody, and welcome to the library. I'm Tennessee Fast, and I'm coming to you today because today we're going to be covering something that's not Robert E. Howard. It's not any sort of sword and sorcery. Well, actually, I guess you can kind of say it is sword and sorcery. Let's just take that as an aside right now. Today we are going back to a topic that I have covered on this channel twice, 3 times, 2 times. I think it's 2 times. I think this is actually 3 times. Today we are going into the Heavy Metal magazine relaunch that came out in April of this year. Issue number 1. It looks like this. The reason why we're going into this now is because, well, I just finished reading it. I know it's July. I know I'm somewhat late to this one, but we have a reason for this. And a wizard is never really late. He arrives precisely when he intends to. What we're going to do today is we're going to turn the camera around. We're going to sit down at the desk. And I'm going to talk through what happened here. And we've already covered the what happened here twice on this channel, but let's just do a quick refresh and what we're going to look at today. Then we're going to turn the camera around, look down at the desk, and I'm going to share what I thought the top pieces within this magazine were to me and what really spoke to me. Bear in mind, I am a fantasy guy, not so much a not so much a sci-fi guy, but more of a sword and sorcery and fantasy guy. So I'm going to talk to things that spoke to me in that. Then we're going to turn the camera back around, sit down at the desk and say, well, Tennessee Fats, bajillion-dollar question. What'd you think of this? My love is draining, it can't go on. That Hamilton soundtrack, by the way, just a banger, solid banger. That's not what we're talking about today. Today we are talking about this, Heavy Metal Magazine number 1. Now I said, let's talk through what happened here just briefly because I don't want to belabor this point. I've already covered it twice. I did check, it was twice. So here's the deal. As a Kickstarter backer, my receipt of my issues was delayed. And I understand why. And I will once again say this right now. The management team at Heavy Metal Magazine has done a fantastic job of making things right for us backers. And I'm just going to stop right there. If you're part of the Angry Mob, which is sort of a tongue-in-cheek name of a group of people, you know. And if you're not part of the Angry Mob, well, you don't know. So let's just set that aside. So the problem was I was delayed in receipt of my copy. That doesn't mean everybody was, but I was, okay? So when it arrived, though, I suddenly realized I only bought variant covers. And when you're reading a Heavy Metal magazine, what you do is you do a little something like this. You pick it up, you open up the page like this, you fold it around like this, you sit in the chair brooding and you read. And you know what I don't want to do with a variant cover? That. So I went out to the local comic shop. I was picking up this book, which is a Richard Corbin book, which is going to be something we're covering in an upcoming video. Just putting that out there. And I did grab the standard Greg Hildebrandt cover, this one. And that is my reader copy. So that's what happened here and why I am so late to the party. I apologize, but we're here now. So, now that we've got that out of the way, and if you really want to know more about the Angry Mob and what happened, I will put links to the actual videos where I discussed that in details down in the description below. Now, let's not belabor this point any further. Let's get into the book. Okay, the camera's turned around, so let's get this bad boy out and take a look at it. So as I mentioned in the intro when we were talking about this one, this is my reader copy. I actually went out to the shop and picked this one up because I did support the Kickstarter and I got variant covers and they were here and I thought, well, do I want to make these my reader copies? Especially since I'm going to be thumbing through this thing. And when you read a Heavy Metal magazine, you want to sit comfortably on a chair and you're going to wrap the cover around the back and do all the regular stuff you do with a magazine. That's what you do when you read it. So this is my reader copy. Greg Hildebrandt cover, by the way. Very neat one. And I do like the throwback with the heavy metal on the cover there as well. Pretty darn cool. So what we're going to do here, as I mentioned in the intro, is we're just going to walk through the stories in here that spoke to me, that I thought were particularly cool. I'm not going to include everything in here because I don't want to spoil it. And I'm also just going to do overarching things that, well, were within the actual stories. Well, let's just call it wet your whistle if you're interested and you want to go down this road. You can still pick this one up. And I know, well, you know, I'm not going to steal Heavy Metal's thunder. Go to the web store. Go to the web store if you're interested because you have options, okay? Let's just leave that at that. So let's start into what I thought was particularly cool. Now, caveat now. As you guys know, Heavy Metal magazine pushes the limits a little bit. Just a little of a lot, okay? So the result of that is sometimes you're getting things in here that perhaps the YouTuber isn't really going to be cool with. So we are putting Post-it notes in here. I actually had to go back to, where is it? It's over there. I actually have a comic board with all sorts of Post-it notes that I've created over the years to put on top of things for these videos. And I can tell you, I did use all of them. They're in here. So let's start getting through the actual content here. You guys, don't worry, you'll be safe. I Post-it noted everything that would be a threat, okay? The first piece that it really spoke to me wasn't even a comic story. It was a piece of editorial right at the front, which I thought was particularly cool. And what this is it's a walkthrough of all of the things that were science fiction during the life of heavy metal up until now that are now science fact. And what's really cool about that is they draw back to the actual creators of many of the things that we now, well, take for granted as reality that at the time were very much like this one, Star Trek's flip phone, and how we now have smart devices. There's a lot of interesting things in here, and they walk to many things that were actually referenced in heavy metal that have now become a reality. Things like, I don't know, 3D printers, virtual reality, all that sort of cool stuff. Very neat the way it's drawn in here. Now, I will say this, and this is an interesting, this is my little observation here. Let's just take a moment. Tennessee fans, what's your observation here? Well, I'll tell you, I'm going to put this out right now. There seems to very much be a spin in here that is a be aware of big data and your digital footprint. And you see it in the commentary. You have to read between the lines, but you see it in the commentary in this. But you also see it in the commentary of what's included and not included within the stories they've chosen. You don't see what they haven't included, but you can only go with what's here. But that's what I found. If you guys disagree with me, who have read this, feel free to down below, let me know, and we'll have a chat about it. Anyways, very cool piece at the front, very neat piece of editorial. All right, let's get into the actual comic stories that start to pop up. Now, the first one that really jumped at me was this story. Now, bear in mind, I'm a fantasy guy and not really a sci-fi guy. Sci-fi is cool, don't get me wrong. I watch Terminator and I do all the cool stuff with Star Trek and Star Wars, but I'm really a fantasy reader and a fantasy aficionado more than I am sci-fi. But this is the first piece that jumped out at me, and this is Enki Bilal's Bug story. Now, I read this, and I had to go on the interweaves, and that's my laptop over there, and check this out, because I said this is clearly part of a larger story, and it's clearly translated. So where does this come from? This is actually a French story. It started publishing in 2017, and they're up to book 3 now. Book 1 was 88 pages, book 2 was 80 pages, and book 3 was 80 pages. And it's a really cool story that's very subtle in the art, but also very subtle in the writing. As you can see just from this image right here, it's like a watercolor type piece that goes through, and the writing is actually really sparse. And it's interesting the way they've done that, because they're leaving it for you to read between the lines to guess at the story as it's going. It's a wonderful piece, and effectively, I'll give you the Cole's notes here. All the data in the world has disappeared. Just one day, gone. And how do we react to that? What happens with that? And how is that going to impact our lives? There's some really interesting things that just jump up in this issue that maybe go, didn't even think of that. Pretty darn cool. I'm hopeful that the heavy metal editor's plan is that they're going to continue to put this in and finish all 3 books of this in an English translation. And the reason why is because we've only got 20 pages here. Well, you've got a total of a lot of pages that are already published in French. So here's hoping that will continue in. Not stealing the thunder. You guys who are interested, if you like that sort of thing, you might really have this one jump out at you. The next piece that jumped out at me again, not a comic story, but an actual editorial piece, is remembering and a tribute to Greg Hildebrandt. Greg Hildebrandt is one of 2 Hildebrandts that were very famous in comics, who's unfortunately no longer with us. It's a wonderful piece that talks to his connection with heavy metal magazine of the past and with the comics and sci-fi industry. And it's wonderful in here, and what I really liked in here was the commentary and the quotes that came from his spouse and her talking about his life and what really drove him. And what I also liked here was the actual inclusion of a lot of his panels and his pages and his work showing what he did over his lifetime. This one was a particular one that jumped out at me because you don't normally in your mind associate Greg Hildebrandt with the big 2 comic creators. You don't normally associate him with Marvel and DC. You're normally thinking of him doing sort of stuff that's out there, more of a sci-fi type genre. But here's the evidence. Here's the Joker. That was pretty darn cool. And it was nice that the way they included the art and walked through it. Again, drawing back to the fact that the guy was on the cover. Like, this is what he did. It's pretty darn cool stuff. All right, next story in here that sort of jumped out. And it's interesting because the first story I picked out that was a cool one that spoke to me was sci-fi and sort of futuristic. And the second one I'm picking does the same thing. And I know it's weird for me to be saying this, but trust me, it's really cool. I'm not going to tell you anything about this story, other than the fact that it's very much a sort of an iRobot type thing. And it does speak to a title I referenced just earlier that I watch and that I enjoy. But it's very much a story of soul and what is it? And really drilling down to the idea of that in this world that's sort of a 1920s, 1930s world. I'm stopping there, all right? It's a very neat story, and I'm hopeful that we get more of this type of thing, because this is self-contained. This story begins and ends in this book. I'm hopeful we'll get more of this type of thing in upcoming issues. All right, next one that we're going to jump into here. And this is getting right back to me and my bailiwick, which is the fantasy genre. And this is Gladiatrix, who is a character that's created specifically for this issue. And I'll tell you, I saw imagery when Heavy Metal #1 first came out that was speaking to the sale of the original art that's associated with this. And I've been humming and hawing looking into it, and after reflection, I think I am going to look into this, because this is a character that's really darn cool. I don't know how much longer this character will last. I don't know if this story is a finite one that will end, or if this is a continuing thing like Tarna. And for the record, Tarna does appear twice in 2 different stories in this issue. Speaking of Tarna, this character is very much like that. But it's more of a Tarna, sort of a Red Sonja type character, sort of a Conan Robert E. Howard type thing. Because you have Gladiatrix, who's this, I don't know, what are we going to call her? Like, here's the image right here. She's a gladiator, but she's also this barbaric super warrior one, which is kind of cool. It's very neat. And the art is done in such a way that it's larger than life. But most of the story is actually in giant splash panels. Like, look at these. There's one of them. Yeah, giant splash panels. I think owning one of these and having it on the wall in the library here would be pretty cool. So maybe I will look into this. I am hopeful we'll see this character continue and become more of a recurring character in heavy metal, just from the small piece I've seen here. But what I will say in here is there's definitely a twist to this story. Don't think it's something simple. This is M. Night Shyamalan level twist. Ooh, what a twist. And it happens right at the end. So be prepared for it. I don't have the answer. I have no idea. I'm looking forward to getting the answer. But this is a cool piece that jumped out, and it is much more of a fantasy piece that speaks to the sort of thing that I read. All right, I mentioned Tarna. I mentioned that she's in here. This is one of the 2 stories. And I only chose to include one of the 2 stories in this video because, well, I don't want to really focus too much on this one character. Just letting you know that she's in here. Tarna, and what I liked about this piece, and this is an interesting piece, it's typical Tarna. I'll turn the page and you can see all the slashy and the slicey that happens with Tarna. Slicey and whack and all the kill. This is what she does. But what I really liked about this one is this simple act at the end, showing that she is legitimately a nice person, a good character. Anyway, it's one of those things that I really enjoyed. I thought this was the better of the 2 Tarna stories that was included, so that's that piece. It's sort of sci-fi-ish. Tarna is also sort of fantasy as well. This story right here was a weird one. Transcendestiny. And I am choosing to include this in some of the top pieces that I read in here. And this one I actually enjoyed more than almost everything else in this book. And the reason why is because it almost throws back to the idea of the Swamp Thing and the green. And it's a very ethereal story with some wonderful art to it. And you have to guess as to what's happening along here. The language is very good, but you have to guess going along. It was one where when it was over, I'm not going to continue. It was one where it was over, I said to myself, ooh, yeah, return to the green. It was, I enjoyed this. Read it and think on it. It takes some pondering. When I read it, I had to sit down and ponder on it for a bit. Close the book and go, Because I was sitting in the chair brooding. See, and when you're in the chair brooding, you brood. All right. Last comic piece in here that really jumped at me was this one, which is All American, which is sort of a throwback to a 1950s type thing. And what this really is a social commentary. And it's a social commentary speaking to an older time. And the reason why you think it's the 1950s is really because, well, it's there. 1953. And it really, the art style speaks to that, tells you that's what it is. It's an interesting story, obviously a Cold War sort of story, but it's really all about the twist. I don't know how many of you have read a lot of the old EC stories. And I know one of the stories that got William Gaines in a lot of trouble was the story called Final Judgment. And this story effectively is recreating the twist that happened within that. I'll show the image of the Final Judgment splash panel that's at the end over here that really got them in a lot of hot water, that he refused to change. And I give him a lot of massive street cred for refusing to change that. That took balls, and I respect that. This is one of my favorite EC stories. And this is very much along the same vein, because you have this giant battle in a small town, and at the end of it, the very person driving that robot, once again, does not match the color. And this is, again, you got to bear in mind, you're talking about segmented United States. Segmented 1950s Southern United States. And I love the wink. It was such a wonderful twist, and I like the way they put this. Very much a social commentary communicated through the comic medium. Just a wonderful piece. And those are the real jump pieces that really went to me and went, wow, these are some of the top stories in here. Now, I will give one extra point of, well, just mad cred on this one. And I'm going over to the back here, and it's going to be on the inside page, so I got to do this. The bus. If you've read the old Heavy Metal magazines, you know the bus was something that was in there all the time. And every time it was sort of this tongue-in-cheek sort of just twist. They didn't have any language to it. It was just a visual. And it was generally 6 panels just like this. But it was always a neat twist of the bus, waiting for the bus. Being on the bus stops, literally waiting in outer space, having the bus come by, and you only go in with $1, and they need exact change, and you got to get back out of the bus and wait in outer space. It is so cool. And I like the fact that we've got, once again, another bus story right here. Oh, just very subtle, very well done. And again, these, I don't remember these by Kurt Merlo. And maybe I'm just not thinking correctly here. On the same page, but these also throw back to a wonderful 1950s style that I really enjoy. But again, for me, it was all about this. This was a beautiful throwback to me, as well as the other ones over here. But that one, well done, Heavy Metal. And that's basically what I chose to be my top stories inside this one. Really a cool magazine. All right, let's talk about overall. What did we think of this? Because nothing compares, nothing compares to you. Okay, let's get into the bajillion-dollar question now. On the world's squeakiest chair. I love this thing. What do we think of this, Tennessee Fats? Well, I think a lot of things, and I'm going to try to make this as succinct as possible, bearing in mind that I'm a crazy old man and I ramble a lot. Heavy Metal Magazine has always been a bit of a beacon in the industry. And the reason why it's been a beacon in the industry is because it's always pushed the limits of what you would expect in the comic medium. And as an aside, I do think we need to change the word comic because I don't think it applies to a lot of what we read today. I think that term has connotations that are really no longer applicable to 90% of the stuff that's being produced right now. But set that aside. It's always been there pushing the limit. It's always been the magazine that I've enjoyed picking up and reading over the years, and that's been gradually growing in the Tennessee Fats collection because it's a light read. It's something you sit at the desk and read to enjoy something that you wouldn't see otherwise. It's giving artists and writers who you don't normally see in the mainstream a chance to showcase their talents and really test ideas and push boundaries. Now, that boundary pushing will always make people uncomfortable to some degree. Every time you're pushing a boundary, invariably you're the change agent and people are like, well, that's just crazy talk. Is it though? Is it? Let's step back for a second and think about what happens with these change agents. Well, they start to determine the new norm. Heavy Metal Magazine, for me, has always been one of those magazines that you've picked up and said, okay, this is really determining what the future will be for a variety of things. And this particular issue has done a great job of carrying that forward. It's a beautiful issue of 227 pages that is a wonderful mix of sci-fi and fantasy. When I picked this up to read it, I was really excited about reading it because it's nice to see heavy metal back in print. But I said to myself, and this is me judging a book by its cover. See what I did there? It's a book and it has a cover. I said to myself, you're not going to enjoy the sci-fi stuff. You're going to really enjoy the fantasy pieces because you've always enjoyed those in Heavy Metal Magazine. And in fact, there's one piece of fantasy that's in here that is a recurring story that's always been, or has been for a long time, in Heavy Metal that I didn't even discuss. I left that one out on purpose for those of you who are thinking about picking this one up that are fantasy fans, because I didn't want to spoil it for you at all. And trust me, when you see it, you'll see it, and you'll thank me for not ruining it. But here's the deal. I was surprised. You guys saw when I flipped this around and we looked at the actual stories that were in there. The sci-fi stories really did a great job of grabbing my attention. And they grabbed my attention because of the themes. They grabbed my attention because of what was happening below the surface. When you read below the surface writing, you suddenly say, ooh, what is happening in here? And that Gladiatrix story was just mind-blowing for something that was so small. And now I'm sitting here wondering, well, what is the twist? I don't know. I really, and I'm looking forward now to my next issues coming in because I did subscribe. I went online and subscribed. And when they come in the mail, me being able to read these. I'm looking forward to continuing the Bug story and seeing how that shapes out. I'm looking forward to other stories that will be included in this because this had a lot of one-time stories in them. Well, other one-time stories will now come in for issues 2, 3, 4, 5, all the ones coming up. They're not all continuing pieces. So this is going to be a fun time. So quick answer to this one, Tennessee Fast, what did you think? I really enjoyed this. I think this was a really well done relaunch and continuation of the legacy that is Heavy Metal Magazine. And I'm looking forward to future issues. If you pick it up, I'm hopeful that you'll think the same way. And I'm hopeful that you'll think, I think maybe this deserves some special support and continuing to push these boundaries and change the medium that we're all reading and enjoying. Anyways, everybody, that's your answer. That's our video for today. It's a pretty quick one compared to what I normally do because I normally ramble a lot. Yeah. Everybody, we'll see you in the next video.